Welcome to 5 Good Minutes.
You're listening to today's inspirational message on the book of Ecclesiastes with Kurt Bjorklund.
Ecclesiastes 2 has these areas that we seek to make our lives feel significant, that the teacher says ultimately are havel, or vanity, like a breath. They don't last. They aren't substantive. And the second one, the first was pleasure, verses 1 through 3, verse 10, 11, 24. The second one is productivity or work, labor, toil. Verse 4, I made great works. I built houses and planted vineyards for myself. I made myself gardens and parks and planted in them all kinds of fruit trees. I made myself pools from which to water the forest of growing trees. Then he says, it goes on and talks about some of the things that he bought and possessed. And what he is saying, in essence, is I took it on myself to do things that seemed like they mattered and would outlive me, and things that made me feel productive. And one of the great tensions, I would say, in life is the tension between work, which is made by God, and you are called to work. Go back to Genesis chapter 1 and 2, where we're told that you are given dominion over the earth and you are to rule it, you are to populate it, you are to cultivate it, you are to give yourself to the thriving of the human race on this earth and the goodness of the world. And so that's been called the creation mandate. So on one hand, it's a great thing to throw yourself into work, but yet again, the same challenge that exists with this idea of pleasure, and that is not to make your work ultimate. And we see this because verse 20 says this, so I turned about and gave my heart up in despair over the toil of my labors under the sun. Because sometimes a person who has toiled with wisdom and knowledge and skill must still leave everything to be enjoyed by someone who did not toil for it. This also is a vanity and a great evil. So what does he say? He says, I realized that I built all these things, these houses, these gardens, these forests. I planted trees and fruit trees. In other words, I worked hard. And I realized that one day I'm going to die and somebody else will enjoy it. Now, this is a similar lesson in some ways to stuff. But notice the essence here is not on the acquisition of stuff. It's on the enjoyment of labor. Do you know how sometimes when you work on something and you're done with it and you say, that's really a cool thing. And then he says, but understand, one day you will walk away from it, you will pass away, and somebody else will come. And he says, I realize that it's vanity, it's a poof, it's a breath. And then he calls it a great evil, which seems, and this is why I say this is a tension, because he says in essence, this is something, even though we know that God calls us to work, that is a great evil. Now here, the word evil normally is the word ra, which just means bad. So it might be an overtranslation to call it evil instead of simply saying this is a great bad. This is just tragic is probably more what he's saying. This is the kind of thing that you look at and you just say, I gave myself to this. And what did I give myself to this for? And again, the idea here is to say, give yourself to it because God has called you to, but understand that this is not where you are going to get lasting significance. That one day everything you give yourself to will be in the hand of another. I've told this story before, but when I had pastored a church in Michigan for a decade, and we had built a new building, I had worked pretty hard in those years for the church to grow and to build and all the things that go with that. I had moved to Pittsburgh, and we had gone back to Michigan just a year later to visit. And while we were there, I went over to the church to see some of the staff and friends that I had there. And I remember being buzzed into the security perimeter and coming in and going up, and the person who was at the front of the office asked who I was. And I remember thinking to myself, the chair you're sitting on, I went and bought and I put it together, like literally, physically put the chair together that you're sitting on. And you don't know who I am. And in a way, it was one of the more freeing moments because it reminded me that all of your work, all of your toil will one day be forgotten and people will say, who? Who are you? Well, but that is exactly when you have the right perspective on work, when you're able to say, I'm doing this for the glory of God, not for being remembered or making a name for myself. Otherwise, it will be a great a great bad, because you'll say, how did I work for all of this? And what did I get? Well, if you do it unto God instead of for yourself, then there is still great reward.
Thanks for joining us here today. There's a lot of great content to explore on Orchard Hill Plus and on the Orchard Hill main feed from the weekend. Have a great day.